3, 2, and 1. It has been 724 days since the last Selection Sunday, and now we are just 4 days from the next Selection Sunday, Sunday, March 14th, 2021, for the 2021 NCAA Tournament. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten Podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. It is Wednesday, March 10th, the opening day of the Big Ten Tournament. 4 more days until Selection Sunday in our final Bracketology Wednesday ahead of Selection Sunday. So this, probably the most crucial one we have, with our resident bracketologist, Kevin Sweeney, doing bracketology work not only for us here on the Locked On Big Ten show, but of course, Sports Illustrated as well, and covering college basketball with the best of them across all of the internet, whatever medium you want to follow. Kevin Sweeney is your guy. And let me just add this, Kevin Sweeney. He is boots on the ground in Indianapolis, not just for the men's basketball tournament in the Big Ten, but the women's basketball tournament as well. He is our everything man here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast.
I'm a busy man back in Indy. Love to be back in the great city of the Big Ten. So it should be a fun weekend. You know, there's like 27 teams here. The hotels are hard to book. You know, we'll see what the food situation's like in a few minutes here. But yeah, it's a great time to be in Indianapolis. So we're excited about it.
Are you at least staying at a hotel that provides a free continental breakfast in the morning?
There is a free breakfast. We've been here for free breakfast. You'll have to see it.
Let's go. That's what you love. This is March, and whatever hotel you're staying at in Indianapolis recognizes that as well. So much to discuss here on the opening day of the Big Ten Tournament. Overall, though, Kevin, I think this past weekend, the final weekend of the regular season in the Big Ten Conference, provided a little bit more clarity. But as we focus on the conference tourney now, which team or teams do you think has the biggest potential of growth or room to even slide in the next couple of days in Indianapolis?
It's interesting because I think most teams are relatively set. I think if you're looking at teams that can move up or move down, I think Ohio State could buck its trend. You know, the 4 losses in a row is not great, and if they have a strong week, that could bounce them back. They're not getting to a 1 line at this point, but you know they could certainly solidify their 2 seed. And you know, right now they're the last 2 seed in my field right now. They could drop down to 3 if they lose. They could move up the seed list and potentially position themselves for a better matchup if they win. I think their team. I think Purdue is probably the biggest riser because we don't really know what Purdue is. They don't have some of those elite wins at the top of the Big Ten, but they've been so good lately. If they are the team that we've seen recently play at such a high level, they could get some of these elite wins and start to sneak up and potentially be. I could see a 3 seed. I think a 2 would be tough, but a 3 is possible for Purdue. And then the only other team that I would really highlight would be a team like Maryland because they're the only team in the Big Ten that still has a question of whether in the NCAA tournament. I was pretty convinced they were a lock. I still think they're probably in, but they could make everyone sleep better if they just win 1 game here. So those are the teams I'm watching the most. But it's whenever you're bringing such great basketball talent across the landscape together in one city, there's a chance for some pretty fun stuff. So we're excited about it.
Maryland seemed that they were squarely inside the NCAA tournament after rattling off 5 straight wins. But when you lose to Northwestern, those cats are getting hot right now. And then when you lose to Penn State in the fashion they did in the regular season finale, allowing the Nittany Lions to come back from down 16, yes, it's going to be a little bit of a sweaty and stressful next couple of days in College Park for sure. But let's focus on the top seed in the Big Ten tournament, the Michigan Wolverines. We don't know the health of Eli Brooks for this conference tournament. Do you think there is any potential if Michigan were to fall in Friday's quarterfinals that they would be bumped off the 1 line?
I don't really think so. I think some people would say perhaps Alabama, if they won the SEC tournament, or Iowa, if they won the Big Ten, could jump them. I don't really see it. I think the worst thing that could happen to Michigan would be to jump down to the 4th 1 seed behind Illinois, and that's really what's being duked out here in the closing days. And if they win the conference tournament, particularly if Baylor loses, they could jump up to the 2. So that's really what I'm looking at. I would be surprised if they fell off the 1 line.
Boots on the ground, although you just arrived in Indianapolis, have you heard any health updates about some of these teams in the Big Ten Conference tournament so far?
I have not. I think generally it wouldn't surprise me if a guy like Eli Brooks should take it slow, right? Like the Big Ten tournament is a big deal, but it's not the NCAA tournament, and you don't want to rush a guy back. I think my expectation would be caution, especially with you're playing 3 games in 3 days. That can be taxing on the body. So I would expect teams to exercise caution, especially teams that are pretty solid like Michigan, into where they're going to be.
I think that's a great point. Because Michigan doesn't have a lot of room for growth or even to fall down off that 1 line, I think they'll focus more on getting a healthy Eli Brooks back for the big dance, because that is where their focus will be. Another team that might have some health issues with the status of Joe Wieskamp is, of course, the Iowa Hawkeyes. You mentioned it there briefly. If Iowa were to win the conference tournament this weekend in Indianapolis, can they make a run to the 1 seed?
It's tight. I would doubt it. I still think they would probably get left off. But it would just, it would surprise me, quite frankly, if they did. The path is there, though. I mean, that's the thing. Is if Iowa were to win, you're talking about beating likely 2 other potential 1 seeds. And that's so resume changing that all of a sudden you start to have to consider different things than you would. I'm pretty confident at this point that it wouldn't happen. But at the same time, the net's good. The wins are good. The Ken Palm's good. It's not out of the question. But I would say 10% or less.
So we talked about Michigan and the fact that they will play the Friday quarterfinal against the winner of the 8-9 matchup, that being the Maryland Terrapins or Michigan State as the number 9 seed. What is at stake in that game between the Spartans and the Terps? You think that Michigan State is squarely on the right side of the bubble. You mentioned to us what Maryland has at stake this week in Indianapolis. Anything else that will be a huge factor and a implication of that game between the Spartans and the Terrapins?
It's funny because I think last week or maybe the week before, these things all kind of gel together. We said, Michigan State, that first game of the conference tournament is going to be like the definer of their season. If they win that game, probably in the tournament. If they lose that game, probably out of the tournament. And now they're a lock because they somehow beat Michigan and now they're in. So now you feel like Maryland's in that spot. Again, I think Michigan could guarantee that they're on the first 4 if they beat Maryland. I think there's a good chance they're going to be avoiding that anyway, but it's at least conceivable that they would fall into the first 4 if they, lose that game. And for Maryland, look, the resume is still so much better than the rest of the bubble that, I have a hard time saying you would leave them out. But at the same time, a potential 14-13 record against Division I competition. Remember, they're one of those 15 wins they have right now on the ledger is against Wingate, which doesn't count in the eyes of the committee. I would not want to risk being the first team ever to be 1 over 500 and getting into the tournament. First it will be the first team if they're 2 over 500 too, but there's an expectation that 2 over 500 is enough, you're clear. There's a silent understanding about the bracketologists that 2 over is really what you need. And so Maryland could roll the dice and do 1 over and say, is this going to be a problem? Is it not? Again, should it be a problem? I don't think so. I think they should get it regardless. But again, you never want to give the committee a reason.
Never want to give the committee a red flag to look at your resume and say, maybe there's another team like a Syracuse on the bubble that we might want to throw in there just to keep everybody happy with Jim Boeheim, because that's what a Syracuse fan has to deal with on a yearly basis. So Maryland and Michigan State play in that game on Thursday. Another team that will be in action on Thursday because they struggled down the stretch and did not get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament is the 5th seed, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think it's a silver lining to hopefully gain some momentum and get a win on Thursday for Ohio State, who I still think very highly of. But as you see it right now, Kevin Sweeney, where is Ohio State on the seed line for the NCAA tournament?
So they're my number 8 overall right now, so the final number 2 seed. And they're in good shape for that. I think even if they lost to Purdue, they'd have a pretty good shot, depending on what happens to the threes, right? You have Arkansas, who's surging. They're the number 9 overall right now. They could jump them if they win the SEC. Same thing if West Virginia won the Big 12. Those things could be a mitigating factor for Ohio State. And I think the easiest way for them to lock in that 2 line would be to win 2 games in that game in the 12-13 game, and then win the game against Purdue. I think if they get to, I believe, the semifinals, that would be. My brain isn't really working here. It's the semifinals. They make it semifinals, they're going to be fine. If not, then they probably sweat it out for the 2 seed. But I agree with you. I think it could be a silver lining because you really don't want to enter the NCAA tournament 5 losses in a row. And Purdue is a good enough team where you could really be staring that down if they had wound up as the 4, Purdue the 5, and you're playing and you get a chance to get hot against the Wildcats, the Penn State, Minnesota Golden Gophers, and who knows? Maybe the way the Wildcats are playing, they'll pull some magic themselves.
You never know. You don't want to see a Northwestern team that has won 4 straight games because in Northwestern's 3-0 perfect start to Big Ten play, one of those wins in Evanston over the Ohio State Buckeyes. So you never know.
Many people are saying don't let the Cats get hot. Many people.
I agree. I'm one of those people. You never want to let the Cats get hot. So as we're speaking with Kevin Sweeney, our resident bracketologist on this Locked On Big Ten podcast, the final Bracketology Wednesday leading up to Selection Sunday, because we are just 4 days away from the day that the NCAA tournament bracket will be revealed once again. So, Kevin, we talked about Ohio State there. Another team in the middle of the pack, the 6th seed, is the Wisconsin Badgers. It has not been a great end of the year for Greg Gard and company, losing 5 of their last 6 games in the regular season. Are they falling down possibly to a double-digit seed in the Big Dance?
I don't think they're going to go double-digit, but I do hear the noise of people who are a little bit lower on the Badgers' resume than I am. I still think it's a pretty good accomplishment to go 10-10 in this league. I think they have good wins. Of course, really no bad losses on the ledger as well. And so my personal feeling is they should be fine. They should be a 6 or a 7, but you want to avoid the 8. The 8-9 game is not a fun game to be in. You're adding in the fact that now you're playing, likely Gonzaga or Baylor because you can't play Michigan or Ohio State or Illinois in the second round. So, if I'm lining it up, I'd much, much rather be staring down Alabama in the second round or even a 3 seed like an Oklahoma State than I would be Gonzaga. So that's my feeling. I think Wisconsin's resume, as it stands right now, could use a little bit of a facelift here in Indianapolis. And if they can get a win or two, that would help them a lot. And it would also help their confidence because, like you said, they really haven't played good basketball lately. The only win against Northwestern, this is a pretty wild thing. They haven't beaten an NCAA tournament team since January 27th. They haven't beaten a team that's over 500 since January 27th. Their last 3 wins, Northwestern, Nebraska, and Penn State, not exactly a murderer's row. So it would be good to see the Badgers figure it out here in the coming days in Indianapolis.
Wisconsin will play the winner of the 11-14 opening round matchup today between Penn State and Nebraska. So the last team I have to ask you about as it pertains to the NCAA tournament for the Big Ten Conference is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. After 30 long years, did the win over Minnesota in overtime this past Saturday guarantee that Rutgers will be in the NCAA tournament field?
It did. Yes, it did. It was not pretty. I didn't really enjoy watching it. Rutgers basketball team that day, that's all you need. You needed to win. It didn't need to be style points. They got what they needed. It would be inconceivable for them to be left out at this point with the good, because essentially their resume is on par with Maryland's, except for they wouldn't have the reason to leave you out, which is the weird win-loss record. So actually Maryland's resume might be a little bit better than Rutgers' still in terms of the quality of wins and the metrics, but they don't have this weird, win-loss record hanging over their heads. So Rutgers is fine. They will dance. I think they'll probably be somewhere in the 8 to 10 seed range. Could move up with some strong performances here in Indianapolis. I think it's a good opportunity this week for them to figure it out, particularly against Indiana. That's not a very good Indiana team. See if you can build some confidence here heading into the NCAA tournament, because I don't think Rutgers is playing its best brand of basketball right now.
I think the pressure of trying to get back to the big dance for the first time in 3 decades was weighing on this Rutgers team down the stretch. I have a little bit of bias. I've made my love for Rutgers known to everybody, either through social media or this podcast. But I'm just saying they have the experience and some talent across the depth in that roster to maybe make a little noise here in March. So, Kevin, I want to ask you just more so broad questions about the bracket as we get ready for Selection Sunday in just 4 days from now. In terms of how it seeds out, because I know there's some things with the Big Ten teams being possibly on the 1 line and the 2 line and being able to group teams from the same conference in the same region or portion of the bracket. What exactly are the rules the selection committee takes into account when it comes to putting teams from the same conference in the same region or part of the bracket?
So there's no rules directly about the region itself. Essentially, the committee has two rules that I know of that are common rules. There's some more, boring ones that I'm sure even the audience wouldn't understand. I don't barely understand it. Essentially, the two main principles would be that you do not create a rematch, whether that be a conference or a non-conference rematch, in the first 2 rounds. So, for instance, you wouldn't want 2 seed Ohio State and 3 seed Iowa, let's say. I mean, Iowa's not going to be a 3 seed, but 2 seed Ohio State, 3 seed Iowa in the same region. Or I guess that doesn't actually apply here. 4 seed, 4 seed and 5 seed. You wouldn't want the 4 and the 5. 4 seed Purdue, 5 seed Wisconsin. You wouldn't want that to. You would never create that. And then you also cannot create a 1 seed and 2 seed from the same conference, or that's very frowned upon. So, and that's something that's going to almost definitely come into play, because you have 2 likely 2 seeds in Iowa and Ohio State, and 2 likely 1 seeds in Michigan and Illinois. And you can't pair those. So that means you're automatically sending Iowa with Gonzaga or Baylor. And it'll be interesting to see what the committee does, because Iowa already played Gonzaga. So do we automatically hide Iowa? That's not a rule. You can have that rematch in the Elite Eight. So what would we do here? I don't know. We'll see what the committee does. But essentially, the 2 rules would be the 1s and 2s, and then the 1st and 2nd round.
So you could have maybe an 8 seed from the same conference in the same portion of the bracket as a 1 seed, or no? Could you have an 8 seed Rutgers in the same portion as the 1 seed Michigan?
No, because they'd play in the 2nd round. So you could have the 8 and the 4. You could have 8, 4, and 6. You could have like four from the same conference. That we talked about, like maybe the first Big Ten first bracketology was I had like 4 Big Ten teams in one region. And
the Michigan region. Never forget.
It was fantastic. Yeah. So you essentially, it's just for those 2 pairings. So 8, 9, and 1, 16. You could only have 1 Big Ten team in that 4, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, give it to me straight. You are a resident bracketologist. We are always looking out for your well-being. You are boots on the ground in Indianapolis this week. What do the next 4 days for you look like leading up to Selection Sunday?
So, I mean, we're going to get off this call. We're going to get dinner because we haven't eaten dinner. And then...
What time is it there? Almost 10 o'clock at night, Central Time? Does your mother know this? Oh, goodness.
We've not eaten, but then I'll come back to the room. I will do some prep for the women's basketball broadcast tomorrow for Northwestern's game against Illinois. And then I will wake up in the morning. I will update the bracket for SI. I will finish another story I'm working on for SI. I will finish my Illinois prep notes. I will head to the arena, broadcast women's basketball game, come back, update the bracket based on the day's action, go out, get more food late at night, do the same thing the next day for as long as the Cats are playing. That's the plan here.
There we go, man. What a couple of days in Indianapolis for our resident bracketologist, Kevin Sweeney.
Nothing better.
You know what they say? What month do we sleep in?
May.
We sleep in May. And this is March. Our resident bracketologist, Kevin Sweeney, we all owe you a great debt of gratitude here on the Locked On Big Ten podcast for allowing us first to coin you our resident bracketologist, and then for allowing us to pick your brain over this past month here on Bracketology Wednesdays. My sincere thank you for allowing us to do this. It's been a ton of fun. I have gained so much information from you. Thank you very much, Kevin Sweeney.
It's been great, Ben, and I'm always around. I know maybe things get drier in the off season. We can chop it up about the old days.